Well, first of all, thanks for having me here, and best wishes for the future of this yearly CAIRO forum. The way I will sort of get out from the trap is to place the issue at a global level. I have a few specific recipes for the individual country, etc. But let me consider the debt problem a global problem. And by the way, I have some difficulties to take away my country from the So it's a global problem, and the global problem should be tackled with the right global governance. And we don't have this. We are in a tremendous moment from the point of view of the governance of the politics and of the global economy. We have wars. We have all sorts of problems. We have our international organizations do not work politically as they should. They have fantastic technicians, but the decision-making is blocked by a lot of diplomatic issues. And this happens at the United Nations, but also at the IMF, for what I understand. So let me tell you that for me, a solution to this, if you want, it's a public. It's a global public good that we are looking for, financial soundness. And you cannot pursue this global public good without a good governance of the world. Among the indispensable building blocks of this global governance, there is what I like to call the global South, and forget about the BRICS. I like the global South, possibly ex-China. And the global South is crucial, both because it's highly indebted, at least in many of its protagonists, and second, because it's a new protagonist of the global diplomacy. And this growing diplomatic profile of the global South could be helpful to approach the global debt problem. And let me also say that the European Union could be helpful in sort of leveraging on the global South to form an alliance which makes very serious proposals and very implementable proposals to change important aspects of the global governance by breaking this tremendous situation where you have the two blocks, call them as you prefer, the democratic and the autocratic, the East and the West and the rest, the goods and the bads, the US and China, etc. Call it as you prefer, but we cannot stand other 10 years of this tremendous way of looking at the world. We have to break this thing in all issues, and the financial issues are among those that we might tackle also with technical methods. So I think my idea on the governance issues is that the EU should start a diplomatic initiative, very strong. I mean, in some sense, we have started because we have hosted the Global South, for instance, at the G7 with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of involvement. We are trying to show all the possible interest for the Global South, but we should be even more proactive and also smart and also united. The problem is that the European Union is not that united. And so when we speak, we are not so credible because we don't have one single voice. But perhaps by making an exercise on these global topics, we could find it. A second observation that I would make as a broker is that, we have to admit that for both borrowers and lenders, the incentives to encourage over-borrowing and over-lending are there. The benefits from borrowing appear immediate to governments in particular, but sometimes also to the private sector. While the costs of servicing the debts appear in the medium term, and this creates an incentive to overborrow. But lenders also overlend, and they overlend because, well, they can immediately cash the profitability of their loans, and this is particularly true for private lenders, obviously, while the risks of default are in the medium-long term. And this is well known. And sometimes the IMF-guided debt distress solutions tend to overprotect lenders' interests so that they sort of reinforce this propensity to borrow, to lend, I'm sorry. To correct these incentive structures, we need some measures. And, these measures would count especially for avoiding future excesses in debt, but they can also help to deal with the legacy problem by benefiting the sustainability of existing debt. So I don't want to criticize what our moderator has set as a rule. I mean, there are differences between dealing with the existing debt and looking at the future, but there is also a big linkage, because if you convince the market that you are well organized to avoid excesses in the future, the sustainability of your existing debt will increase. So I think that some of the constraints that the IMF or the European Union puts to indebtedness are useful also for existing debts. I don't want to be long, so let me just list some sort of technical aspects that can deal with the legacy of existing over-indebtedness. Some of them have already been mentioned. Well, we need several innovations can be considered besides, obviously, the bilateral, multilateral concessional financial supports. They can also always help, obviously. To improve that restructuring and rescheduling opportunities, well, first of all, we have to coordinate and coordinate also with China, because without a good coordination with China's credit, there's no solution to the overall problem. The radical measure would be to create a sovereign debt authority. Let me recall this idea that Anne Kruger proposed in 2002 and was killed at the IMF. I was there for some reason, and I was just frightened by the violence with which the US government, in particular, being backed by US banks, basically killed the proposal. And this is something that should be taken out of the box and discussed again. But then you have, in the meantime, a lot of smaller things to do. New coordinated legislations could encourage, for instance, private creditor participation in debt workouts. This is crucial, because otherwise it's a matter of codifying the duties of creditors to cooperate in debt restructuring, for instance. You have to oblige them to enter in restructuring and not acting as a blocker, to enhance collective action mechanism, immunizing sovereign debtor assets from seizure when the debtor is involved in an orderly debt restructuring process. If the debtor gets involved in an orderly debt restructuring process, there should be some premium on the existing debt. You can subsidize and facilitate asset swaps, and you mentioned it, where existing credits can be transformed in globally desirable ways, like rechanneling funds towards financing of climate actions, for instance. So there are a lot of technical innovations or reinforcement, but we have to do something because the figures are terrible. And I end up by saying my little figures that are really figures from the IMF. Middle East and North African countries, debt servicing costs jumped from an average of around 0.5 of GDP during the 10 years preceding the pandemic to nearly 2% in 2024. So they were multiplied by 4. In South Asian countries, the jump was from less than 2% to around 3%. In sub-Saharan Africa, from about 1% to more than 2%. According to the World Bank Global Economic Prospects, about half of the world's poorest countries are either in debt distress or in a high risk of distress. Debt service costs also limit the possibility for many countries of developing their own climate actions, etc. So it's a terrible situation, and we have to do something. I have two very short considerations in answering your question to us. Well, one thing is we should enhance transparency of debt transactions. All details of debt agreements should be explained to the public, to the markets, and to the voters so that they are aware of what is promised in exchange of debt. Costs and benefits of both debts and their repayment schedules should be clear to everybody. A second thing, but here I really go for dreams, is to reform the IMF. And here is where I see a role for Europe. The European Union has much more votes than it deserves, given its current dimension. It should offer these extra votes to China and the Global South, and with their alliance, reform deeply the IMF in many instances, because the IMF is a super precious box of brains and people, exceptionally useful for us economists in particular. But in order to have more political impact, it should become much more multilateral, much more independent of the United States, much more efficient from the point of view of taking decisions. So even the board should be changed, the way they take. But in order to do these reforms, we need to change first the voting powers, because if we keep the voting powers as they are, the US will never allow us to change the IMF and make it really efficient, because if it's efficient, its power the power of the US will decrease. And they're not bad. I mean, the Americans are good and not bad. But when you have a power and you also have a big market, the market for dollars, that is your richness and your contribution to the world. Because, I mean, this is a service that the United States is providing to the world, the market for dollars. And you tend to be the boss. We have to take away some of the incentives they have to be too bossy.